Hey everyone, this is Nick with Twisted Wrister Hockey, and in this video, I'm going to talk about 10 defensemen who I think are due for a breakout in 2018-2019. Now last year we were treated to Ivan Provorov, Matt Dumba, and even Seth Jones putting up some career numbers. So I'm wondering, who's going to kind of come out of nowhere and rise to the upper echelon of defensemen? Now these are just 10 of my picks, but I'm curious to know who you think is going to break out among defensemen this year, so let me know in the comments below. I've already made a video very similar to this one in which I talk about 10 forwards who are due for a breakout this coming season, so check that video out as well. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to Twisted Wrister Hockey. Alright everybody, so without further ado, let's go. Okay everybody, let's get started, and remember I'm not actually ranking these 10 to 1, this is just me choosing 10 players for this list. So we're going to start in Columbus with Marcus Nudavara. Now, Columbus, as we know, they have a lot of talented young defensemen. They've got Zach Werenski, they've got Seth Jones, and Marcus Nudavara is another one of these guys. He's projected to play with David Savard. Nudavara, he had 23 points in 61 games last year. You know, that's decent, but not flashy. And I think that you pair him with a guy like Savard, who's kind of a rock and reliable, and you give Nudavara some more time on the second power play unit, and I think that he could definitely produce. Now, in the Finnish Liga, when he was 21 years old, he had 22 points in 50 games, and he was a plus 10. So he's had success there. Not to mention, he's a plus 27 in his career with Columbus. And remember, 2 years ago, they weren't even that great of a team. Actually, they were pretty much in the cellar. So Nudavara is definitely a guy to watch out for. Next up on my list, I've got Matt Benning of the Edmonton Oilers. I know that Edmonton had some troubles last year with goaltending and defensive depth, but I think that the overall defensive core for the Oilers is going to be coming into their own this year and into next year. I could have easily picked Oscar Klefbom, I could have easily picked Darnell Nurse for this list, but a lot of people already know who those guys are. And I think that Matt Benning is somebody who could, again, if you look at that top four, I think that he could, make a case for a strong defensive player. He had 21 points in 73 games last year, and he was a plus 5. Now, how many guys on Edmonton can say that? I know that Nurse and Larson were also in the positive. He had 18 takeaways to 61 giveaways, so he definitely needs to improve his puck handling. But I think that when you look at him, he's got 149 blocks this past season, so that's promising. And I think that he won't have all too much pressure on him because the expectations are that Nurse, Klefbom, Larson are going to carry the load. So Matt Benning, I think he's going to fit in nicely next year. Now we're going to go to Chicago, and we're going to talk about Erik Gustafsson. Now you look at my stat line here, he had a 55.4 Corsi for percentage. Now again, I don't look into Corsi too much, but that jumps out initially. He had 16 points in 35 games, so that's not even half a season, so he would probably be at 35 points at the end of the year. You know, earlier in his career, he was only averaging about 15.5 minutes, and now this last year he was at 18:33. I think that with Keith and with Seabrook, they're getting older and they have a lot of mileage on their careers, so I think that Gustafsson is definitely going to see his ice time go up. He could possibly end up with over 100 blocks, and he started 57.4% of draws in the offensive zone. And I think that Chicago could use more scoring depth from their defense. Okay guys, so pop quiz. Which Florida defenseman had 54 points, led his team in time on ice, and had the highest plus-minus out of his team's defense? It was Keith Yandle. You thought it was Zach Blad. Well anyway, Keith Yandle, again, he's kind of underrated. But the guy that I want to talk about here is Mike Matheson. Now, in his second full season, Matheson tallied 10 goals and 27 points, 137 blocks, that's pretty solid, and 68 takeaways, to 92 giveaways, which isn't great, but it shows that he's still able to take away the puck. And he started nearly 60% of his draws in the defensive zone at even strength. Matheson had a prolific college career at Boston College, and when he was in the AHL, he put up 20 points and a plus 14 in 54 games with the then Portland Pirates. So this guy, he can play a very solid two-way game. Florida, as I've said before, they're my dark horse to get to the Cup Finals. And a big X factor is the development of the second and the third defensive pairings. Matheson's progress could mean a lot for the Panthers. Now this is one guy I actually haven't really heard of before, and I'm kind of surprised because you look at these stats and there's a lot of potential there. This is Steven Santini of the New Jersey Devils. He had 10 points in 36 games last year. He had a 0 plus-minus, but what's interesting about that is that he started nearly 72% of faceoffs in the defensive zone, so this guy is always back on D. He had 73 blocks and 113 hits in 36 games. That is actually really impressive, especially those 113 hits. Now, I could have picked Will Butcher, and he was kind of overshadowed by the performance of his fellow rookie last year, who was Nico Hischier. Will Butcher, I mean, he played very well. I think that he's eventually going to be a top defenseman in the league. But again, we're looking at kind of the dark horses, the guys who are going to break out that we haven't really heard of before. So I like Santini a lot. Now, this was interesting. I actually made this list just before the NHL Network put out their top 20 defensemen list. And when I was watching The Hockey Guy, I was impressed and satisfied that he included this guy in the conversation. And that's Josh Manson of the Anaheim Ducks. Now, it doesn't really sound like too much at first, but Manson was 17th in Norris voting last season. He had 37 points, and he had a plus 34, 99 blocks, 48 takeaways to 60 giveaways, which is fine for a defenseman. He took 58% of his draws in the defensive zone, and he led Anaheim in shorthanded time on ice. So if you're not too familiar with Manson now, you just might be next year. Okay, next up is somebody who I think is criminally underrated in the NHL. Jaccob Slavin of the Hurricanes. Now, playing for Carolina does not help his case too much. I will say that. He finished 18th in Norris voting last year and 20th the year before. When it comes to taking care of the puck, Slavin is not just one of the best defensemen in the league, but perhaps one of the better players in the league. Look at that, 77 takeaways to just 40 giveaways. Defensemen don't put up those kinds of numbers. He led his team in shorthanded time on ice. He had only 10 penalty minutes. 154 blocks last year and 161 the year before. He's averaged 32 points the past 2 years, so he's not a huge offensive threat, but consider if he can play with Justin Falk, who generates productivity on offense, then I think those numbers could possibly increase to 40. Now, I think that if Carolina happens to break through into the playoffs despite trading Jeff Skinner, it's going to be because of two things. First, they're going to get their goaltending figured out. And second of all, Slavin will develop into one of the best two-way defensemen in the NHL. Next up is a guy who hasn't played too much in the NHL, but he shows a lot of promise, and that's Travis Dermott for the Maple Leafs. In 37 games with the Leafs last year, he had 13 points, a plus 16 rating, that's pretty good. 48 hits, 36 blocks, not amazing, but that's pretty respectable for a guy who's only logging 16 minutes of ice time. Now, he led the Marlies to the Calder Cup this past season. He had 18 points in 28 games with them, and a plus 15 rating. I know that there's a lot of buzz around Dermott. He's not necessarily going to be starting for the Leafs opening day, but I think that he's definitely going to make his way in that lineup eventually. Next up, let's go to Dallas, and I'm going to talk about Stephen Johns. Now, Dallas's first defensive pairing is solid, but Johns and Mark Mathot, especially if he's healthy, they can definitely shut things down. He doesn't put up big numbers, but should Dallas get back into the playoffs, I think that people are going to pay more attention to him. He's very physical, 201 hits, 155 blocked shots, and I'm hoping that his ice time goes up as well. Lastly, this is a little bit of a homer pick, but I definitely have good reasons for this. This is Joakim Ryan of the San Jose Sharks. Now, Joakim Ryan had a tough assignment last year. He had to play with Brent Burns. Brent Burns, as we know, he's a forward in defenseman's position. But now Ryan is more acclimated and he can play a stay-at-home role if need be. He had 98 blocks in 61 games, and I calculated that he was a +3 at least with Brent Burns, and he helped Burns bring down his plus-minus. As we know, Burns finished the season with like a -16, so it wasn't his best year when getting back on defense. In 2016-2017 with the AHL San Jose Barracuda, so that was Ryan's last full season in the AHL, he put up 49 points and a +27 in 65 games, so I think he has big potential. When the Sharks are on offense, Brent Burns draws so much attention, especially on the power play. He shoots more than anybody else in the NHL except for Ovechkin. And the thing is that defenses have been able to kind of figure that out. You know, Burns' goal total dropped a ton last year. So I think that Joakim Ryan has a chance to contribute offensively and make San Jose's offense more dynamic. Alright everybody, so that's going to do it for my list. What I wanted to do was kind of pay equal attention to teams in the NHL, so the teams that I talked about on this video, I did not talk about in the previous video when I ranked forwards who were going to break out. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my channel. I'm putting out videos twice a week on oddball hockey topics, homebrewed statistical analyses, jersey unboxings, and more. This has been Nick with Twisted Wrister Hockey. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you again soon.